What if I told you there are only 3 stitch types, and within these stitches you can create absolutely anything for machine embroidery? Let's talk about it. Welcome back, Lexi family. Happy to see you once again, and this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. If you are new to embroidery and you're just discovering how to create your own designs, this video is perfect for you, because in the world of machine embroidery you're going to see so many different effects on stitches, on designs, and you may be thinking to yourself, that's something I could never create because it's so complex. In reality, it all stems from these 3 stitch types, and I'm gonna show you how you can use them for your own designs. Before we get started on how to add them to your designs, let's first identify them. Starting with this one right here. This is called a run stitch. If you've ever sewn on a sewing machine or even by hand, you know that there's a straight stitch that goes on a single line. Well, this is called the run stitch. You can see when I'm clicking on the computer, I'm just creating my own run stitch, and it creates a line for you to use in multiple instances. Now, the running stitch has different properties that you can add to it. The main thing being a stitch length. Right now it's at 2.5 millimeters, but we can always increase it to 7. We can bring it down to 0.1, although I don't think you'd ever want to do that, so I'm gonna bring it down to 2.5. And stitch length refers to the spacing between each stitch. You know, your embroidery machine will put the needle through the fabric and out, that is 1 point. Then this is the spacing between that stitch. So that's 1 stitch point. Then the machine comes out, it does the next one at 2.6 millimeters. But if I were to now increase that to 6.7, well, you can see that the spacing between these stitch points becomes wider. So for the run stitch, that is the most important setting. It's the stitch length. So let's bring this down to 2.2. And now let's talk about the run style. I'm not going to talk about motif just yet because that's a completely different effect, but I am going to talk about double run. What does double run mean? For run stitches, when you do a double run, it basically means that you're gonna go through the path. So right now it's following this whole path right here. It will not just stop stitching right here. Instead, it will return on that same path, which means that it's gonna do 2 passes. The first one going this way, and then the second one returning. And I can even show you if you'd like to see. As it does the first run stitch, so that is if there's just 1 stitch, you can see it goes all the way to the end, but because we have a double run, it will return on that same stitch on top of it and start and stop at the same point. Now we do have one more setting, and that is called a bean stitch. The easiest way to explain a bean stitch is that if a single run only does 1 pass, the double run does 2 passes, the bean stitch will do 3 passes, but it'll do it slightly different, where instead of having to go and return, it will start at this point right here. So for example, let's say this one, it will do 1, 2, 3. So there are 3 threads happening right here. Same thing. 1, 2, 3. And then it moves on to the next one. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So that's the bean stitch in simple terms, and it is very popular because it has a very solid look to it without you needing to return to that same point. And these 3 types of run stitches all have their own specific use for whatever effect you want to give to your design. So this is the run stitch. You can change its stitch length to whatever you want. You can also do single run, you can do double run, or you can even create your own bean style depending on the style that you want to go for. Next, let's move on to one of my favorite stitch types, and that is a satin stitch. Now, satin stitches are so beautiful because of how smooth they look. If you zoom in, you can see that they go from one end to another, almost like a zigzag. So you can see it goes one end to another, back to the other side, then here, then here, then here, like an accordion or like a zigzag stitch. If you've ever done any sewing, then you know what a zigzag stitch looks like. And this is the main effect with satin stitches. If I were to create using a classic satin, let's say I'm gonna create kind of like a complex shape, something that looks like that, where I'm just picking really random widths that may not look very appropriate, but as you can see, it always looks so smooth because all it's doing is going from one end to another, back and forth until the end. And you can always rotate these stitches. So for example, if I want to create a curve, I'm just going to create a little bit of a snake that goes around let's put it there. You can see the stitch points follow the up and down so that it looks very nice and smooth. Now, when we start playing with satin stitches, we want to check out some of its properties. The main settings that you'll play around with are the density. So for example, this is 0.4 millimeters density, but if I were to bring it up to 1.5 millimeters in density, you can see that it is now a lot more spaced out. And just so you understand, the density doesn't mean from here to here, it means from this point to the next point. So that is 1.5 millimeters in density. So it is just adding more spacing. So if I were to bring this up to 2.2, now the spacing between this point, this stitch point right here, and the stitch point right here is 2.8 millimeters. Where if I was to bring it down at 0.2 millimeters, well, you can see that's very tiny. And I don't know, it might be just a little bit too tiny. So I'm just going to bring it down to 0.4. And when you're playing with threads that are 40 weight, well, you know that there will be no gaps between these 2 points. Now with satin stitches, there are a few rules that you want to follow, and that is to not go lower than 1 millimeter or go wider than 12. And that's because the machines have limited constraints that just simply won't allow the stitches to go from one side to another. That plus having this wide of a thread just hanging out on your embroidery, especially if you're wearing it, it can snag on anything. It would pull from this center right here and ruin your whole design. So there are a few guidelines that you want to stick to when it comes to satin stitches so that you get the best results. And before I continue to the last one, we do have a free cheat sheet and video guide available that talks about all of these settings, so make sure to click the link in the description to download it now. The last stitch is called a tatami or a fill stitch. Now if you haven't noticed, all 3 stitches are exactly the same, because when you embroider with one single needle, all you can really do is create a running stitch. So from that running stitch, it then goes to creating a zigzag, which makes it look like a satin stitch. Well, tatami is no different. All it's doing is it's creating a running stitch in a very specific pattern that makes it look like a fill stitch. Now this is where it gets really cool, because then you have things like density, kind of like we talked about with satin stitches, whereas if I increase it, the density, you can see that there's now more spacing between each stitch. But then there is also the stitch length that you can play around with, so the length between each stitch will give it a different pattern. But the beautiful thing is that there are also fill patterns. So for example, there are so many patterns here that I can use. If I just want to have a smooth stitch, these are preset patterns so that I can create a very specific stitch type. So let's say if I want to do something like a fur, then it can kind of replicate the fur. If I want it to be really smooth, or if I want it to be like a brick wall, I can do that as well. Let's see, a snake skin. That's the beautiful thing about these patterns, is that it'll create the kind of pattern that you want depending on the spacing and the stitch length of your running stitches. It even can do satin, but again, the reason why it's doing this and it looks so weird is because this is bigger than 12 millimeters, which is already breaking those limits that the embroidery machine can do. So the program automatically detects that. Let's bring it back to something else. Now we're doing some cornrows. We're doing a pattern 10. There are so many things that you can do with the fill stitches, and fills are so great to create bases for your embroidery stitches. So now that you know a little bit more about the stitch types, how about we talk about how we can implement them on designs, starting out with the running stitch. Let me show you a couple of examples for each type, starting with this horse redwork. Redwork has been so popular since the Victorian era, and it's because of its simplicity. It used to be made by hand, well now we do it on an embroidery machine, and the goal is to do 2 passes on every stitch. Remember the double run? Well, when it comes to redwork, you're trying to do a double run on every single stitch, and because you're doing that, the start and stop of the design will always be in the same spot. So let's just play this really quick. I'm gonna put it at ×4 so you can see what that looks like. As you can see, it's gonna start stitching out, and it is not jumping anywhere. The machine will create this whole design in one go without any jumps or any trims, and that's because of its pathing. I've chosen to path this design in a way where the stitch will go there, will pass by every single spot once, and then return. Now, as you can see, this design only has 2,000 stitches, which is why red work is still so popular, especially amongst quilters, is because the stitches are so minimal that you can produce work really fast, and it is a really fun thing to do. So if you haven't played around with red work yet, highly suggest you check it out. But that's just if you want to use one color. This is a horse design that I created using only running stitches, and as you can see, all I'm doing is using multiple colors and put them on top of one another to create an awesome looking abstract horseman. And again, the beautiful thing about these kinds of designs is that not only are they really fun to create, but they have very little stitches, this one being 3600, which is like so small for a design like this. When it comes to running stitches, they aren't just used to connect other shapes to one another or also to create zigzags. They can be used by themselves to create awesome pieces of work. And on the soldier that I created, you can see that I'm using run stitches all over this fire right here. I placed them randomly so that I can create the effect of fire. You can see it on the brown, you can see it on the boots right here, even on the firewood. That the goal of running stitches is not only just to connect things and to create other stitch types, but also you can add effects on top of things. It really gives it that handmade look to it, which I really like in embroidery. So that's my goal. Whenever I'm thinking of running stitches, I'm like, what kind of details can I add onto my design that will make it look like it was made by hand as opposed to by machine? Now, moving on to satin, let's check out this flower. As you can see, all of these flowers are made with satin stitches, or you can even call them zigzag stitches, because in reality, you can see all it's doing is going from one point to another point, counterpoint, all the way around. So all of these flowers were made using zigzag stitches. I believe all of them have the same density, and because they're all going from one point to another, when you stitch it out, it looks so beautiful. It looks very clean. It is one of my favorite effects, not only for the reason that you can use it just like this, but also, let me show you really quickly, just like how I use run stitches to create those awesome like random effects, I also use it with different densities to create those awesome like shadows, those flames and everything. So although you can use the run stitch, you can also use the satin stitches with different widths to give it awesome effects. Now, remember how I told you that satins have a width limit, that if you go over 12 millimeters, the machine won't be able to stitch it out? Well, that's absolutely no problem because the software has the ability to split those stitches. So if we go over here to auto split, you can see that every 7 millimeters, the design will split so that we avoid that issue. And when you zoom out, it still gives it that beautiful stitch look in every single place that it could have gone over 12. So you no longer have to worry about your designs going over 12 millimeters because the software takes care of your split stitches. Now, so far, I've shown you a little bit about the run stitch as well as the zigzag satin stitches. Let's talk about the fill stitches. And I consider fill stitches to be the basis of a band. Underrated, but much needed. Fill stitches are the shapes that if done correctly, you won't even notice them. So let me just hide everything else and let me show you where those stitches lie. I'm going to hide all of these, and you can see that this is where those stitches are. The fill stitches are used as a base to help the rest of the design be complete. As I start unhiding, you can see that I'm using my satin stitches to create this kind of effect where it almost makes the design look super 3D. And for example, right here, I can use my satin stitches. Then I switch to my run stitch because run stitches are also used to connect things. We're only ever using one stitch, and that's just a machine going over a pattern. So I like to connect my designs to ensure that I don't jump and trim all over the place. Let's look at this dog design, which makes the fill pattern look a lot more noticeable. Now with the satin stitches creating an outline as well as the eyes and nose as their main role, the fill stitches are more prominent because we want to create that effect. Here is where the fill pattern come in handy, because if I were to select all of these like brown stitches right here, I can just go to the fill pattern and I'm going to change it to something else. Let's say 29 if I want to give it more of that style. It's all right. Let's switch it to smooth. Yeah, smooth looks pretty cool. So again, you can always play around with those different kinds of settings, those preset fills that already come into the program, and you can of course use different colors to create all the shapes that you want. Now here's the latest design that I've created, and it's just a quick example to showcase how all of those stitches come together to create an awesome design. Once you pay attention to the stitch settings, you'll notice them everywhere. For example, right here above the eye, you can see I'm using some run stitches not only to connect all of the eye, but also to create a really fine outline to give that look of depth to the upper lid of the eye. As you can see right here, not only am I using satin stitches to give that effect between light blue and purple, but I'm also using again the run stitches that go up and down to give it that awesome effect of like a defined outline between both of these hair strands. As you get more comfortable playing with the base types, you then will add on different effects. You'll add different patterns, different densities, different lengths, and it all comes together to create the kind of design that you want. So when I zoom out of this design, although it looks incredibly complex, it was just made up of run, satin, and fill stitches using different densities and different properties to create the final design. And this is what embroidery is all about, guys, is for you to try and test and play around and just see what you like. Try different settings, practice using different stitch types, and find out what your style is, what you enjoy creating, because it is only with practice that you will improve in this craft. It's such a beautiful, beautiful journey. So I hope you guys enjoyed learning a little bit of the different stitch types. If you have any questions, please make sure to leave them down in the comments. I know some parts may still be confusing and a lot of information to try to absorb, so again, the links are in the description for the free cheat sheet and video by John Deere, as well as if you're interested in the software, the sign up sheet is now available in the link below. Thank you guys so much. I wish you the best of luck with your experiments on different stitch types. I can't wait to see what you guys create. I'll see you on the next video. Take care, Legacy family. Bye bye.